They forced a non-lethal baton on the Deathworld girl. She crushed 12 Predator recruits in seconds. The Baton combat doctrine had been authored by instructor Proctor Baton over 12 assessment cycles and applied without modification since. It was named for him because he had built it from nothing, tested it across 31 species, and graduated 217 cadets to active deployment. Not one of those graduates had been human. Until this morning, that had been a data point without significance. Baton pulled the doctrine up while the cadets finished laughing. The relevant section was brief. Threat tier is assigned on intake and may only be revised by the proctor after a minimum 30-cycle observation period. He had assigned Tier 2. The trial would confirm it. The cadets controlled every variable of the engagement. She could not deviate from the script written for her. This was the logic of the doctrine, stated plainly. The test contains her. He believed it completely. He also pulled the tactical briefing on the cadets, now reforming their positions on the mat. Vrethkal combat pairs in standard pincer formation succeeded against same-mass opponents at a rate of 94%. He wrote this into the observation header because it seemed relevant to the outcome he expected. He did not note that Riley was not same-mass. His rubric had no column for what that meant. Cronac 7 stepped forward from the cadet line. He was the lead cadet, 280 pounds of apex-trained muscle, 3 regional tournament placements, and the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around him without anyone deciding to do it. He looked at Riley the way experienced fighters look at someone who has wandered into the wrong building. "I have seen hatchlings more dangerous than this," he said. His mandibles, Vrethkal had them too, shorter than Drenthari, used for emphasis, clicked in the direction of his squad. "At least the hatchlings bite." The squad found this satisfying. Several of them clicked back. Riley said, 4 older brothers, Detroit, 12-on-1. She twirled the crowd control baton once, loosely, the way someone adjusts a pen they are not paying attention to. "This is what we call a Tuesday." Baton wrote the exchange down because he had learned to document things he did not fully understand. He started to look up Detroit on his reference pad while the cadets' laughter shifted from amused to something closer to offended. He did not finish reading before the exercise began. The entry he found said, "Mid-sized terrestrial city, Northern American continent, population significant." He would come back to it later. The baton was logged in his intake record under standard equipment assignment, crowd control issue, minimum charge, level 1 training setting. He added one note below it: human requested no upgrade to standard combat equipment, assessed as unfamiliar with available options. He believed that too. Veshorath stood at the line marker and called the exercise. Standard protocol, 1 volunteer. Every hand in the cadet line went up at the same moment, which was either impressive coordination or a sign that something had gone wrong with the group's collective threat assessment. He looked at the 12 raised hands. He looked at Riley, who was still holding the baton loosely and watching Cronac 7 the way someone watches a bus they have not decided whether to board. He made a decision he would later describe in his report as a methodological choice. He pointed at the entire line, all 12, simultaneously. The reasoning, which he wrote into the log before the exercise began, was genuine. He wanted to establish the floor. He expected the session to demonstrate clearly where the limit was. He expected this to be educational for the human. Riley turned to look at him. She held eye contact for a moment, then she winked. He was not certain what that meant in the human signaling register, but he noted it down anyway. She turned back to the mat and cracked her knuckles. The sound that came back from the reinforced walls was larger than the action that produced it, hard and resonant, like a structural test. Cronac's 7 expression shifted. Something in it recalculated, briefly, then decided the calculation was wrong and went back to what it had been. Veshorath raised his hand. "Begin." Cronac 7 charged. He was fast for 280 pounds. Veshorath had watched him charge in 37 documented sparring sessions, and the speed was always the thing you did not fully account for until you were watching it happen from the boundary line. He covered ground the way large things moved, when they had stopped thinking of anything as an obstacle. Riley waited. She waited until Chronax 7 was 3 feet away. Veshorath would rewatch this part of the footage 7 times over the following hour, and he would count the distance each time, and it would be 3 feet each time. Then she dropped low, swept Chronax 7 leading leg with the baton, and the charge setting fired on contact. 280 pounds of apex-strained cadet hit the mat in a way that had nothing to do with a decision on his part. His leg had simply stopped cooperating. He went down like a sequence of events that had already concluded. Riley was already moving before he landed. Veshorath's hand froze over his log. He did not write anything, he watched. 2 cadets broke from the line in a pincer formation. The textbook approach, 2 angles, 94%. Riley vaulted off Chronax 7 forearm as she passed, used the lift to push both cadets' vectors wrong, and they collided with each other at full charge speed. She tagged both necks on her way down, 3 cadets on the mat at 15 seconds. He wrote Anomaly 1. The remaining 9 cadets shifted to a proper formation, hand signals, multiple approach vectors, the kind of coordination that took weeks to train. Riley stood in the center of the mat and moved her head in small, precise increments. Veshorath watched the increments. Each one was a different cadet. She was cataloging 9 moving targets in real time, and her expression was the same neutral it had been when she walked in. He looked down at his log. He had written Anomaly 1. He looked back up. He was going to need more lines. At 35 seconds, 7 cadets were on the mat. Veshorath was still taking notes, which was the professional thing to do and also the only thing available to him that felt like standing on solid ground. His notes were becoming less analytical and more observational in a way he did not fully control. He had written the words, "She was already inside the room" 4 times without planning to. The run at 25 seconds had been the moment. Riley had charged a cadet at full speed, planted her foot on his bent knee as he braced for impact, and launched. 2 aerial baton contacts to helmet's head protection with a crev-rated impact resistance that the equipment specifications said should have been irrelevant at minimum charge. The conducted path through the gear had mattered more than the force delivered. The specifications had not anticipated the conducted path. 7 down at 25 seconds. 2 more after the rear grab attempt that she had dissolved by becoming, in his exact log language, briefly impossible to hold. The second pincer attempt came at 30 seconds. The same formation that had already failed. The 2 cadets who had already failed using it were on the mat. 2 different cadets ran the same geometry and got the same result. Veshorath noted this with a feeling he could not immediately classify. 10 down at 35 seconds. Drethkarl and 1 remaining cadet backed toward the line. Drethkarl had 3 regional combat tournament wins. He was the most decorated cadet in this intake. He looked at Riley the way you look at something you are trying to file into an existing category and cannot. He asked, simply, how? It was not a question with a question mark in it. It was a question the way a wall is a question. Riley told him, she made it anatomical, not inspirational. You telegraph every strike. Your eyes track to your target before your hands move. Your weight shifts before your charge begins. Your breathing changes before your lunge starts. Every fighter does it. Most of them never get shown it. Drethkarl listened. His remaining partner had not moved. Veshorath was writing quickly, not because he needed the record, but because writing was keeping his mandibles still. Riley said the exercise was not over. She closed on Drethkarl, baton to the solar plexus, clean and immediate. His partner ran for the edge of the mat. The baton left her hand, spinning end over end, and caught him between the shoulder blades. He went down 6 feet from the line marker. 12 cadets on the mat, 42 seconds total. Veshorath closed his live log. The after-action template he had set to minimal was still open in the adjacent window. He looked at it. He opened a new document. He titled it, After-Action Report, Tier 2 Non-Combatant Assessment, Urgent Revision. He looked at the mat, at 12 Drethkarl cadets trying to remember what had happened, at Riley Marenko standing in the center of the floor, rolling her left shoulder once and checking the baton's grip with 2 fingers. His mandibles clicked, 3 times slow. He did not notice until a junior aide near the wall looked at him with something approaching alarm. He wrote the first line of the report. "If you think I know what just happened, stay close. I am still figuring that out." 40 minutes later, Veshorath found Riley on the observation deck. She was holding a cup of something that smelled like industrial solvent that had been in an argument with something worse. The observation deck overlooked the main training floors, a long narrow walkway with no chairs, which Veshorath had always assumed was intentional on the part of whoever designed it, as a way of ensuring that people who came up here to think did not stay too long. Riley was staying too long. She was also looking at the floors below with the kind of attention that did not look like reflection. It looked like analysis. He had been trying to distinguish the two since she walked through the intake door, and he was not certain they were different things with her. He stood beside her. He pulled up the footage on his pad, 42 seconds, 12 cadets, a crowd control baton at minimum charge. He watched the section where she vaulted off Cronach's 7 forearm for the 4th time that hour. The movement was not spectacular in the visual sense. It was not large or dramatic. It was just efficient in a way that made every other option look like it had been included by accident. "You have done this before," he said. "4 older brothers," she said. "I did not learn the moves. I had them used on me first, and then I learned what to do about them." She drank from the cup. Her expression said the drink was not good, and she had accepted this. "You learn faster that way, slower too at the time, but faster overall." He made a note. He filed it under tactical assessment. Then he considered and added a second copy under xenopsychology. He asked her about the run at 25 seconds, the knee launch, the aerial baton contact through the head protection that the specifications said should not have conducted at minimum charge. She described the angle. He wrote the angle down. He had already run it twice through the equipment analysis tool, and it confirmed what the footage showed, and he still wanted her to say it out loud, because hearing it in plain language was the only way it fully settled. She explained it in plain language. He wrote it all down. 3 floors below them, the 12 Vrethkal cadets were being assessed by the medical team. Cronach 7 was sitting upright. He appeared to be describing something with his hands to a cadet next to him. Veshorath could not hear it from the deck. He suspected it was the same thing he had watched 7 times already, described from a different angle. He submitted the after-action report. The reply from the academy director came back in 11 minutes. He read it twice. "Only their pride. Schedule more sessions. If humans can do this with crowd control equipment, I want cadets trained to fight like them." Veshorath looked at the message. He looked at Riley, who was still watching the training floors below and did not know yet. He looked at the equipment log still open on his pad, the baton's charge record, minimum setting, level 1. He was going to need to read the rest of the entry on Detroit. The director's message sat in Veshorath's sent queue for 3 days before anyone at the administrative level acknowledged it formally. In practice, the acknowledgement had already happened. 2 additional sessions were scheduled by the end of that first afternoon, slotted into the Vrethkal cohort's standard rotation, as though Riley was simply another training variable rather than the reason 6 of those cadets were still visiting the medical bay. Veshorath did not tell her about the scheduling change. He filed the updated roster and spent the intervening time reviewing the footage again, which by the end of the second day he had watched in full 11 times, and in the section covering the knee launch and aerial contact, approximately 30. He had also finished reading the entry on Detroit. It was not a long entry. It described a mid-sized city on the Northern American continent with a history of industrial production, significant population, and a cultural record that the Council's xenography database summarized in 2 sentences before moving on. What it did not explain, what no database entry had ever been required to explain before, was what it meant to grow up there with 4 older brothers and learn that the only way out of a bad position was to make the position worse for someone else faster than they made it worse for you. He filed a request to the xenography office for an expanded entry. He marked it urgent. The Krev challenge arrived on the fourth morning. It came through the council's formal diplomatic channel, which meant it had routing codes and a seal and 3 separate authentication signatures, and it meant that someone with genuine authority had decided this was worth the paperwork. Veshorath read it twice at his desk before his mandibles started clicking. Thrakandua, 73 formal challenges, 73 victories, Krev warrior of the 3rd rank, which was the highest rank a living Krev could hold because the 2nd and 1st were reserved for ancestors and were not technically ranked so much as classifications. The challenge was issued on grounds of Galactic Warrior honor. The demonstration in Gauntlet Hall 5 had been recorded, distributed across 7 council networks, and interpreted by the Krev Warrior Assembly as a public statement about the nature of combat itself. The statement, as the challenge document phrased it, required a response. Veshorath set the pad down on his desk. He picked it back up. He read the section on diplomatic consequence again, which stated plainly that a refusal on Riley's behalf would be logged as a concession by the human delegation and would affect Earth's standing in council negotiations for the next decade, specifically in the areas of defense treaty access and trade corridor rights. He was still reading when his scales, Drenthari scales, shifted color under genuine physiological stress, a fact he was aware of and could not do anything about, dropped approximately 10% of their normal pigmentation. He found Riley on the observation deck again. She was in the same spot. The cup smelled the same. He delivered the challenge. She asked if she could refuse. He explained what refusal meant, not for her specifically, but for every diplomatic conversation Earth would try to have in the next 10 years. He did not editorialize. He read from the document. He was a professional. She was quiet for a moment. Below them, on the main floor, the Vrethkal cadets were running a new drill. Cronax 7 was watching from the edge of the mat rather than participating. He had been watching rather than participating for 2 days. He had not taken his eyes off the recorded footage on the wall display since it had been mounted there for training review. Riley watched him watch it. "Tell Thrakandua," she said, "that Riley the Annoyed accepts his challenge." Veshorath composed the response. His mandibles clicked 4 times while he typed. He sent it. He noted the click count in his personal log under the heading Physiological Stress Indicators, Monthly Record, and then stared at the entry for a moment before closing the file. The prep room briefing happened the following morning. Riley arrived with a bruise on her left forearm from the 2nd training session that she had not mentioned and he had not asked about directly, though he had noted it in the medical observation column of her file with a notation that said self-reported as minor and a second notation beneath it that said not self-reported at all, observed externally. She sat on the equipment bench, and he stood across from her with the challenge documentation on his pad. He asked about her strategy. She said, "Find the weakness. Every fighter has one. She needed to last long enough to find it." She said this the way someone describes a commute, not with dread, not with performance, just with the flat accuracy of a person who has done the math and is comfortable with what the math says. Also, she added, looking at the ceiling, absolute spite. You would be amazed what humans can accomplish when they are genuinely, personally annoyed. He wrote this down. He sat with it for a moment. He filed the first copy under tactical assessment. Then, after consideration, he wrote a second copy and filed it under xenopsychology, human affect, and combat motivation. He flagged the second file for the director. He asked about Thrakandua's bone plates. She asked him to describe the joint articulation points. He pulled the species file. She listened. She did not take notes. He found this either alarming or impressive and could not yet determine which, though he suspected by now that in her case, the two were the same thing. She picked up the crowd control baton from the bench beside her, checked the grip with 2 fingers, and set it back down. "Same equipment?" he asked. "Same equipment," she said. He noted this. He did not note what he thought about it, which was considerable. The Colosseum of Accord held 4,000 beings at capacity, and capacity was what it was at when Veshorath arrived with Riley 3 hours before the match. The floor was 50 feet across, made of a composite material rated for Crev-class impact, which meant it could absorb what Thrakandua did to things without cracking, and the engineering team had never felt the need to consider any other variable. The observation tiers rose in concentric rings above the floor, and they were full by the time the ceremonial preparations were underway, and the noise they produced was not loud so much as structural, a sound with weight. Veshorath stood at the ring boundary with a junior aide whose name he had not yet learned. The betting pools were visible on the display boards at each tier. The numbers were not close. He watched Riley walk to her mark at the center of the floor. She was not looking at Thrakandua's entrance corridor. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at the floor. Specifically, he realized after a moment, at the stress marks in the composite material near the center ring, the impact patterns left by previous Crev matches. She was reading the floor the way a surveyor reads a site. "She is studying the floor," the junior aide said. "She is studying everything," Veshorath said. He did not look away from her. His translator produced a sentence in the wrong order for the first time when he tried to explain the Krev's ceremonial protocols to the aide. He caught it, corrected it, and noted in his personal log that his stress threshold was apparently lower than he had previously documented. The entrance corridor on the far side of the ring opened. Thrakandua emerged. 8.5 feet, 4 weapon-bearing arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary, each capable of independent operation in combat. Bone plates across the torso, shoulders, and upper legs, rated for impacts that the species file described in units Veshorath had to convert twice before the number made sense. The chain weapon on his primary right arm was Crev-forged, which meant it was not a weapon so much as a statement about what weapons could be. He looked at Riley the way you look at an administrative error that has somehow made it all the way to your desk. Riley looked at his feet. Veshorath watched her eyes move down to the feet, up to the secondary arms hanging slightly lower than the primary pair, down to the ankle joint where the bone plating had to articulate. The analysis had already started. She had started it before Thrakandua finished his entrance. He wrote in his log, "She is already inside his decision cycle." The arena master began the ceremonial preamble. It was long, as Crev preambles were, full of tradition and specific language about honor and the nature of formal challenge. Veshorath's translator scrambled again partway through, not random words this time, but a full sentence transposed to the end of a different sentence. The junior aide looked at him. "I am fine," Veshorath said, in the correct order. Across the ring, Riley was not listening to the preamble. She was watching Thrakandua's weight shift as he settled into his pre-match stance. She was watching which foot he favored. Veshorath understood now with the clarity that comes from watching someone do something 11 times and then watching them do it again in a different context, cataloging the data she was going to need in approximately 4 minutes. 4,000 beings held something between silence and noise. The collective held breath of a crowd that knew it was watching something, without yet knowing what. Veshorath's scales dropped another 12%. He noted it. He had stopped being embarrassed about noting it 2 days ago. The preamble ended. The arena master stepped back with a speed that suggested he had assessed the situation and made a personal decision about where he wanted to be when the match began. Riley raised her fists. Thrakandua did not raise his weapons. He looked at her for 1 full second, then he raised them. The crowd made a sound like a structure settling. Veshorath realized he had stopped writing. He looked down at his log. The last entry read, "She is already inside his decision cycle." He did not add anything. He watched. "Stay close. What happens in the next 60 seconds has no category in the Baton doctrine. I checked." Thrakandua charged before the echo of the arena master's last word had finished moving through the crowd. Both primary arms came down in a cross-baton, mace on the left, blade edge on the right, the opening combination that had ended 73 matches before this one. Veshorath had watched the recorded footage of 6 of those matches in the 2 days since the challenge arrived. The combination was not a tactic so much as a statement. This is how it begins, and this is how it ends, and the two things are the same thing. Riley dropped flat. Both weapons cleared empty air above her. The sound they made passing through the space where she had been was a sound Veshorath felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. The crowd pulled a breath in and did not let it out. She was already moving before she hit the floor. She kicked out at the ankle, not the shin, not the knee, specifically the articulation point in the bone plating where the joint had to flex or Thrakandua could not walk. She had found it in the species file. She had listened to him describe it in the prep room without taking notes, and she had found it in the dark of the arena floor in the first 4 seconds of the match. Thrakandua stumbled. The crowd made a sound it had never made in a Krev match before. Not a roar, something smaller and more significant, the sound of 4,000 beings simultaneously updating a belief they had not known they held. Veshorath's translator went offline for 1.3 seconds. When it returned, it was producing his thoughts in the wrong tense. He did not notice because he was not thinking in full sentences anymore. Thrakandua recovered fast. That was the thing about a fighter who had won 73 times. The recovery was as trained as the attack. He reset his stance in under 2 seconds, shifted his weight back to his center, and brought the chain weapon around in a wide horizontal arc that covered most of the ring diameter. There was no gap in it. It was not designed to have a gap. Riley jumped. She caught the chain mid-arc with both hands, which should not have been possible given the speed and the weight, and Veshorath understood in the moment she did it that she had not caught it by reacting to it, but by deciding where it was going to be before it got there. She used her own momentum against Thrakandua's force, redirected herself around the arc's end point, landed behind him, and drove her elbow into the back of his knee joint. He went down on one knee. The crowd's noise reached a register Veshorath had never heard in this venue. Somewhere in the upper tier, a betting display flickered and recalculated. He watched it happen. He noted it in his log with the detached precision of someone who has run out of the appropriate emotional response and is filing things on instinct. Thrakandua rose from the knee. Faster than he should have, he turned. What happened next Veshorath would spend considerable time trying to describe accurately in the after-action report, and would ultimately file under the heading Events requiring non-standard documentation. The hammer arm connected. It was the secondary left, the arm Veshorath had noted in the species file as the less dominant of the 4, but still rated for impacts that made the floor composite material relevant. It caught Riley on the left side as she was coming off the elbow strike. She crossed 15 feet of arena floor without choosing to. She hit the mat and rolled 3 times, and then she was not moving. Veshorath's scales went fully pale. The crowd went fully silent. Thrakandua straightened to his full height. He looked at Riley on the floor. He extended one primary arm, palm up, the Krev gesture of offered yield, the signal that says, "You have fought with honor, and this is where it ends, and there is no shame in it." Veshorath looked at Riley. He thought, she is not moving. He looked at the medical station at the ring boundary. He looked back. Riley pushed to her hands and knees. The blood on her lip was from the impact with the mat, self-inflicted on the roll, which meant it did not count under Krev challenge rules. She looked at it on her fingers for 1 second. She looked up at Thrakandua. She looked at him the way, and Veshorath would struggle with this language in every draft of the report. Someone looks at a problem that has just become interesting. She stood up. She raised her fists. "Okay," she said. The arena microphones caught it perfectly. "Now I am actually annoyed." Thrakandua's weapons did not move for 0.4 seconds. Veshorath marked the timestamp in his log. He would later label it the certainty break, the moment Thrakandua's model of the fight stopped matching the fight. She charged straight at him. This was the thing no one in the arena anticipated, not the crowd, not Thrakandua, not Veshorath, who had by this point watched her do unexpected things enough times that he had believed himself prepared. She did not dodge. She did not circle. She ran directly at 400 pounds of Krev warrior with a crowd control baton and the expression of someone who has done the math and found the answer sufficient. Thrakendua's instinct was to meet a charge with a charge. 73 matches had confirmed this as correct. He set his weight forward. She slid between his legs. Her profile, the one every rubric had listed as a disadvantage, the one the Baton doctrine measured as insufficient mass, passed cleanly under his guard. She grabbed the chain weapon as she went through. It was already in motion from his attempted counter. She did not stop it. She redirected it around his legs, wrapping once, the chain doing what chain does when something changes the direction of its momentum. His own weight finished it. 400 pounds of Krev warrior hit the arena floor face first. The crack the composite made was structural, a sound the floor's engineers had rated for, and the crowd had never heard before because a Krev had never fallen that way in this arena. Riley was on his back before the echo cleared. Both hands found the gaps in the neck plating, the articulation points she had identified from the species file, confirmed from his weight distribution analysis before the match, located precisely in the dark of the arena with no hesitation. She applied bilateral pressure with her thumbs. She pitched her voice to carry to the microphones, not to Thrakendua. Carotid pressure, every species with a functioning brain needs blood flow to it. 10 seconds, tap out or nap out, your choice. The arena was a held breath, wearing 4,000 faces. Thrakendua's weapons were on the floor, his hands opened and closed once, twice. 3 slow, deliberate strikes of his primary palm against the arena floor. The arena erupted. Veshorath's translator went offline for 4 full seconds. When it returned, it produced his next 3 thoughts in alphabetical order. He filed all 3 anyway, because at this point he was committed to the documentation. He looked at his log. The last intentional entry read, "She is already inside his decision cycle." He wrote below it, "She was, the match is over, filing status, no existing category." Riley released the hold the moment the 3rd tap landed. She stood. She stepped back. She did not look at the crowd. She was favoring her left side and checking the baton's grip with 2 fingers, the same check she had done in the prep room, the same one she had done in Gauntlet Hall 5, and Veshorath understood, watching her do it for the 3rd time, that it was not a nervous habit. It was a closing routine, the way a professional confirms a job is done. Thrakendua rose slowly. His bone plates had taken the floor impact cleanly, rated for it, structurally sound. His expression when he turned to face Riley was not what Veshorath had expected from a fighter who had just lost for the first time in 73 matches. He was smiling. He started laughing. The acoustics of the Colosseum of Accord were not designed for that specific laugh, but they tried their best. He extended his primary hand, and Riley took it, favoring her left side, blood still drying on her lip. He turned to face the arena. The crowd noise dropped enough for the microphones to catch him. "This is not how warriors fight," he said. "This is how survivors fight. I did not know there was a difference until today." The younger tiers erupted. The older traditionalist sections were quiet in a way that was not disapproval so much as the look of people being asked to update something large at a speed that felt medically inadvisable. Veshorath watched the older sections. He made a note, "The resistance will not last. The footage exists. The footage is already on 6 council networks. He had checked this morning and the number had been 6. He suspected by the time he checked again, it would be more." Riley limped to the ring edge. "Veshorath," she said, "medical attention, long bath, 15 hours of sleep, in that order." He told her she had just become the first human in recorded history to defeat a Krev champion in formal challenge. "Yes," she said, "can we do the celebration after the sleep?" He said yes, he meant it. He was also already composing the next report in his head, which was a thing he did when he did not know what else to do with the information he had accumulated, and he had accumulated more in the last 6 minutes than in the previous 12 assessment cycles combined. He escorted her to the prep room. The medical team arrived. He stood in the corridor outside while they worked, and he opened his log and looked at all the entries from the last hour, and then looked at the wall and thought about the Baton doctrine and the column it did not have. His translator, unbidden, produced one sentence in the correct order. The rubric does not measure what she learned to do without. He wrote it down. He was not sure yet which section of the report it belonged in. He checked the footage distribution network. The number was no longer 6. 3 floors up, the academy director sent a second message while Riley was still with the medical team. It was longer than the first one. It had routing codes and a council seal. It outlined a proposal for expanding the cultural exchange into a structured program, voluntary enrollment, cross-species curriculum, Riley Marenko named as program director pending her acceptance. The director noted that the Krev Warrior Assembly had already submitted a formal request for inclusion. Veshorath read the message 3 times. The third time he read it, he realized he was being asked to be her second in command. The director had added this in the final line as though it were an administrative note. It was not. He knew what it was. He held the pad. He looked at the prep room door. He thought about Chronax 7 on the edge of the mat, watching footage for 2 days. He thought about Drethkal asking how with no question mark. He thought about the 31 species he had assessed and the column his rubric did not have, and what it would mean to build a curriculum around that column specifically. He wrote a reply, short. He would discuss the details with Riley when she was awake. He did not check the distribution network again. He knew what the number was doing. Riley was asleep for 14 hours and 20 minutes. Veshorath knew this because he checked the medical wing log twice, once at the 6-hour mark because he had a report to file and needed to know whether to list her status as recovering or active, and once at the 14-hour mark because he had run out of legitimate reasons to check and checked anyway. The report took most of that time, not because the events were complicated to describe, because the language available to him kept failing at the edges of what had happened. He had 6 drafts open simultaneously at one point, each one stalling at a different paragraph. The arena fight was manageable, the timeline was clean, the submission was documented, the medical assessment was attached. The problem was the section, the form called Assessor's Interpretation, which assumed the assessor had won. He settled, finally, on language that was accurate without being explanatory. He described what he had observed. He attached the footage timestamp log. He noted Thrakendua's concession statement verbatim, attributed it correctly, and filed it under public record rather than incident documentation because it was not an incident. It was a statement of fact from a credible source, delivered in front of 4,000 witnesses, and it belonged in a different category than the ones he had been using. He submitted the report at the 11-hour mark. The director acknowledged it in 4 minutes. The response contained no new instructions. It contained 3 words, proceed as discussed. Veshorath looked at those 3 words for longer than they warranted. Then he opened a new document and began drafting the curriculum framework. Riley found him in the small administrative office adjacent to Gauntlet Hall 5 the following morning. She was moving carefully, favoring the left side, which the medical report indicated would resolve in 8 to 12 days, and she was carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like the industrial solvent she had been drinking on the observation deck, which he had since learned was a human preparation called coffee and was apparently non-toxic despite all available sensory evidence. She set 1 cup on his desk without asking if he wanted it. He noted this. He did not remark on it. "You have the offer terms," she said. It was not a question. He turned the pad toward her. She read it standing up, which he had observed was how she read things when she was deciding rather than reviewing. The terms were what the director had outlined: voluntary enrollment, cross-species curriculum design, no institutional branding of the methodology as human-specific. The program would carry a neutral designation pending a naming committee, which in Veshorath's experience meant it would be called whatever Riley called it in the first public session, and the naming committee would ratify that retroactively. She reached the final line. He watched her expression not change. "Second in command," she said. "Yes, that's you." The director framed it as an administrative note. Riley looked up. "It's not an administrative note." "No," he agreed, "it is not." She set the pad down, picked up her cup, took a long drink of the thing that smelled like a refinery. Conditions: the program stays voluntary, no institutional requirement, no threat tier exemptions used as enrollment pressure. The curriculum is practical, not ceremonial. Any species can learn it, which means the materials get written for any species, not adapted from human sources with the human parts removed. She paused. "And it doesn't get named after me." "The naming committee." "Tell the naming committee I said no." He made a note. He suspected the naming committee would find this equally charming and frustrating, and would ultimately name it something in Old Drenthari that translated loosely as the way of the survivor, and then spend 3 cycles arguing about whether that was too on the nose. "Those terms are acceptable," he said. "The director will ratify them." Then yes, she finished the coffee, set the cup down on the edge of his desk with the precise economy of motion she applied to everything, no wasted placement, no adjustment after the fact. "When do we start?" He told her, pending formal ratification, the first session could be scheduled within the fortnight. The Krev Warrior Assembly had already submitted 12 names for the initial enrollment. He had the list on the pad. She looked at the list. Thrakandua is first. He submitted before the arena floor was repaired. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite surprise. The expression she had worn looking at the blood on her fingers after the hammer strike, recalibrated for a context that required less adrenaline. "All right," she said, "schedule it." She picked up her cup, remembered it was empty, set it back down. Medical said 8 days minimum before full activity clearance. 12, he said. The report specified 8 to 12. 8, she said, and left. He looked at the empty cup on the edge of his desk. He wrote in his personal log, "She negotiates the same way she fights. The target, she states, is never the ceiling." He filed it under behavioral observation and then, after a moment, moved it to curriculum notes because it was more useful there. The footage distribution number, when he finally checked it 3 days later, was no longer a number he had a clean way to express. The council archivist had opened a dedicated index. He filed this under administrative, no action required, and did not check again. The Krev Warrior Assembly's formal request arrived the same afternoon, not the enrollment request, which he already had, but a separate document with a different seal. It was a request for the arena footage to be included in the Krev historical record, not as a defeat, as a teaching document. The distinction was noted in the request's preamble, and Veshorath read the preamble twice, because it was the kind of language that warranted reading twice. He approved the request. It required no escalation. It was within his administrative purview as liaison, which was a level of purview he had not previously needed to exercise at this particular scale, but the form existed and he filed it correctly. Thrakandua's first session was 11 days after the arena match. Riley was cleared at 10 days. The medical team, he noted, had apparently also learned to negotiate with a margin. He observed from the doorway of Gauntlet Hall 5. He did not enter. It was not his session to run. Thrakandua was on the mat, all 8.5 feet of him, bone plates catching the training hall light, sitting cross-legged in the posture Riley had demonstrated, which looked different on a 400-pound Krev than it did on Riley, in the way that most things looked different when you scaled them by that ratio, but the posture was recognizable. She was walking him through pressure point mapping, not the carotid application that was later in the curriculum, the foundational anatomy. Where the joints flex, where the weight commits before the charge, the things that are true of every body because every body has to move through space the same way, regardless of the plating. Thrakandua was taking notes. He had a small pad, sized for Krev hands, and he was writing on it with the careful deliberateness of someone who is learning that the thing they were very good at was built on assumptions they had never examined. He was not embarrassed by this. That was the thing Veshorath had not anticipated, that a fighter with a 73-match record, publicly submitted in an arena in front of 4,000 beings, would sit on a training mat 11 days later and take notes like a first-cycle cadet. Veshorath made a note of his own. He filed it not in the curriculum folder and not in the behavioral observation log, but in a third folder he had created 3 days ago and not yet named. The folder currently contained 4 entries and no title. He suspected the title would become clear when he had enough entries to see the pattern. He found the equipment log discrepancy 3 weeks after the arena match. On a Wednesday, at approximately the 14th hour of a workday he had not intended to extend. He had been doing administrative reconciliation, the kind of work that exists in the gaps between significant events and that he had been postponing because there had not been many gaps. He pulled the Baton's charge log as part of the standard equipment audit. The log covered both engagements, Gauntlet Hall 5, the cadet exercise, and the Coliseum of Accord, the formal challenge. Both entries read the same. Charge setting, training mode level 1, minimum operational output. He sat with the log open on his pad for a period of time he did not record, which was itself notable because he recorded most things. Training mode level 1 was the setting used for equipment demonstration, for showing a cadet what the Baton's discharge looked like before allowing them to handle it at operational charge. It was not used in exercise conditions. It was not rated for combat application. It was the setting that made the Baton technically functional while producing the minimum possible effect, the floor, not the ceiling, of what the equipment could do. He pulled the full charge specification. At training mode level 1, the Baton delivered approximately 11% of its operational output. 12 cadets, each between 240 and 280 pounds, had gone down in 42 seconds under 11%. He opened the Baton intake form. The entry he had made on Riley's first morning, human requested no upgrade to standard combat equipment, assessed as unfamiliar with available options. He read this sentence. He thought about it from several angles. He deleted the second clause. It was not accurate and the record should be accurate. He opened a new addendum to the equipment section of the permanent file. He wrote carefully, because this was the kind of entry that would be read by people who had not been in the room and who would need the language to carry the weight without his presence to contextualize it. Non-lethal stun baton, crowd control issue, assigned at intake, training mode level 1, used without modification in both engagements, the cadet exercise, Gauntlet Hall 5, and the formal Crev challenge, Coliseum of Accord, charge setting confirmed by equipment log, reclassified per Directive 7 SON override, recommend transfer from crowd control inventory to advanced combat certification program. Threat tier designation for the assigned operator updated accordingly. He looked at what he had written. It was accurate. It covered what the log showed. He added one line. She never asked for a higher setting. He submitted the addendum. He closed the equipment log. He sat for a moment in the administrative office adjacent to Gauntlet Hall 5, in the quiet that follows a completed piece of documentation, and thought about nothing in particular. From the hall, he could hear Riley's voice running a session, the even cadence she used when she was explaining something for the first time, which was different from the cadence she used when she was repeating it, and different again from the cadence she used in the arena, which he had only heard once and had no expectation of hearing again under these conditions. He picked up the pad. He opened the untitled folder. He looked at the 4 entries. He typed a title. He did not show it to anyone. It was a working document. He would revise it when he had more data. He closed the folder and went back to work. 11 days after that, the Council's formal designation arrived. The program had been ratified. The naming committee had met for 6 hours and submitted their recommendation. Baton Combat Doctrine, Revised Annex 7, Applied Survivor Methodology. The document was 43 pages. It cited the cadet exercise footage, the arena match record, the Crev Warrior Assembly's historical filing, and Veshorath's after-action reports. It cited, specifically, the equipment addendum. The final paragraph of the ratification document quoted the addendum's last line and noted, without commentary, that it had been filed by the intake liaison 3 weeks post-event as a routine administrative correction. Veshorath read the ratification document once. He filed it. He walked down to Gauntlet Hall 5 and stood in the doorway. Riley was on the mat with Thrakandua and 4 new cadets, 2 Vrethkal, 1 species Veshorath did not recognize from this angle, 1 Krev who was not Thrakandua and who had enrolled the previous week. She was demonstrating the ankle articulation point, the same one she had found on the arena floor in the first 4 seconds of the match. She was demonstrating it on Thrakandua, who was cooperating with the focused patience of someone who has decided that understanding a thing matters more than the inconvenience of learning it. The cadets were watching. The baton was on the mat beside her, where she had set it down at the start of the session and not touched since. The charge indicator on its side read, Level 1. Veshorath looked at the indicator. He looked at the cadets watching her hands. He looked at the entry he had made in his log 34 days ago, Tier 2, non-combatant, and the line he had drawn through it, and the new designation below it, which the Council had now ratified in 43 pages. He went back to his desk. The baton stayed where she had left it, charge indicator showing Level 1, while she taught 11 cadets what it meant to fight without relying on what you had been given.